I'm Liz Faublis, and this is Currents. The church lends a hand after deadly tornadoes strike the South and Midwest. Plus, getting the word out on a measure to loosen abortion restrictions in New York State.
The Reproductive Health Act is one of our top priorities for advocacy on March 13th, which is Catholics at the Capitol Day. And we're hoping that Catholics from all over Brooklyn and Queens flock to Albany to let their legislators know this is not a good bill. It's not in the best interest of women and kids.
And an unprecedented look inside the Vatican's secret archives. Good evening, and thank you for joining us. A deadly path of destruction in the South and Midwest as a series of tornadoes ripped through the region for a second time in less than a week. The death toll from Friday's twister is now at 39, and entire areas have been leveled. But as CNN's Sandra Endo reports, people are keeping the faith.
Millions of people from Indiana to Georgia were affected by the deadly outbreak of storms that hit Friday and lasted through Saturday. In Henryville, Indiana, it was Sunday Mass as usual at St. Francis Catholic Church next door to the public school in ruins. Preschool teacher Vicki Horan was among a few dozen still inside the school when the tornado hit.
We huddled together, we sang to keep the kids calm, we prayed, we withstood the storm.
And they're certainly not the only ones facing the daunting prospect of rebuilding. Dozens of fatalities and scores of injuries have been reported. Now the focus is on cleanup and care for survivors, along with safety and security for displaced residents trying to rebuild their communities.
We can look out at the desolation and see just desolation, or see a new beginning.
The congregation at St. Francis appears to be choosing the latter. In small, tight-knit towns across the region, you'll find the same thing. Neighbors helping neighbors, relying on their faith and one another to get by.
CNN's Sandra Endo reporting. Now, among the areas hard hit by tornadoes that struck last Wednesday, the Diocese of Belleville, Illinois. One of its historic churches, St. Joseph's in Ridgeway, was destroyed. For more on the situation and how the church is responding, I spoke earlier today with Father John Myler, the spokesman for the Diocese of Belleville. And Father, for some perspective, please describe for our viewers exactly where St. Peter's is located with regard to the devastation in Belleville, because I understand you were not directly affected in terms of physical destruction.
No, the diocese is the 28 southernmost counties in Illinois. Fortunately, I'm right across the river from St. Louis. We're in the metropolitan St. Louis area. The parishes that were by the tornado were several about 200 miles south of us, but they are still part of the diocese. It's both an urban and a rural diocese, and especially the two parishes that were hardest hit are certainly part and parcel of the people of God here in southern Illinois.
And Father, we talked earlier about the beautiful St. Joseph Gothic Church in Ridgeway that was destroyed. Tell us a little bit about the history of that church and its influence on the parishioners of Belleville.
Well, the little town of Ridgeway is only 800 people, and about 200 of them are Catholic. The pastor who lives in Ridgeway also has 3 other parishes in neighboring towns, and he's one of my former associate pastors, Father Stephen Beatty. And on Wednesday morning, he was awakened by the sound of the tornado, of course, and some debris that came through the roof in the rectory. But he was, thank God, fine. He came to the front door and he looked across at the front of the church, and the brick facade of the church was fine. So he said, thank God the church is good. He walked around the block to some of his neighbors, checking on them. And when he came around from the back, he realized that front facade was all that was left of the church. It's a little Gothic brick church. The ceiling, the vaults, the walls, the windows were completely gone. Everything gone in that beautiful St. Joseph's Church in Ridgeway, except for the high altar, the Italian marble high altar, which was a thing of great pride for the people of the small town and this small parish to have such a magnificent altar. It was untouched. It was untouched. Bricks fell, wood fell, windows cracked, but the marble of the altar remained intact.
Yes, and I understand Bishop Braxton saying that the altar, he called it the jewel of the church, and it may be salvageable, is my understanding.
It probably will be, yes. Thank God. But the photographs that show the entire church in rubble and looking up, seeing no roof at all, just the sky above, but then to see in the midst of this rubble this beautiful Gothic altar still standing is maybe tells us something.
And Father, the spiritual core of the community seems to have been galvanized. 400 people packed in for a special Sunday night service. All of Ridgeway's 869 residents survived. Actually, I really want to mention Wednesday's storm. So there are indeed some bright spots in the midst of this devastation.
Well, you know, Liz, that nature is an awesome thing. It's how many good Christian people have been inspired by a mountaintop or the depths of the ocean. But in addition to being awesome, nature is occasionally awful as well. And we have seen, for example, at St. Mary's in Harrisburg, a little farther south of Ridgeway, we've seen the awful effects of the tornado, especially in the loss of 6 lives.
As residents work on putting the pieces of their lives back together, Father, what role have you and the church played in rebuilding and recovery? I understand that the efforts to preserve all they can is really keeping the community going.
It is. These are people in small towns, and in most cases, the church, the Catholic Church, is the center of the town. And so it's very important for their own identity that the church be there for them. These good pastors, I've mentioned Father Stephen Beatty, who is the pastor of St. Joseph's in Ridgeway, and a priest from Onitsha in Nigeria, Father Ignatius Okonkwo, has come all the way from Nigeria. He's been with us for 5 years or so, and he's the pastor of St. Mary's in Harrisburg. He has been through some torments and some tragedies in his life in Africa, and now he's come here, and both of those men are well prepared to lead their people into a future from this terrible natural disaster.
And Father, that is absolutely very encouraging. And what can people watching today or who hear about this interview or see the devastation on TV do to help your community?
Well, first of all, they can pray for those faithful departed who lost their lives. They can also pray and hope for the recovery of the communities, the individuals, the families, and then our own Catholic Charities here in Southern Illinois. Catholic Charities of Southern Illinois is organizing great relief efforts in both those towns. And, of course, the people's generosity to Catholic Charities is an important part of the recovery.
All right, Father Myler, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. And please know that our prayers are certainly with you and the community.
Well, thank you. We feel the prayers coming all the way from Brooklyn.
Thank you so much.
All right. God bless.
God bless. Stay tuned. There's more currents ahead. Cardinal Dolan says he's got his Irish up over the contraception mandate. We'll hear the latest from him along with the rest of the day's headlines next. Welcome back to Currents. I'm Liz Faublas. Coming up later, the Vatican gives visitors a peek inside its archives. But first, let's have a look at the day's headlines. Well, Cardinal Timothy Dolan says the church has its Irish up over the contraception mandate. Speaking over the weekend at a high school on Long Island, Cardinal Dolan expressed outrage at the Obama administration appearing to turn to Catholic groups who are not bishops as authorities on the issue. Now, the mandate from the Department of Health and Human Services requires most private health plans to cover contraception, sterilization, and some abortion-inducing drugs. The Cardinal said the government is engaging in an unwarranted, unprecedented, radical intrusion. He also said he was disappointed but not surprised by the Senate vote to table an amendment aimed at protecting conscience rights for those who object to contraception. While U.S. bishops are weighing in on the situation in the Middle East, Bishop Richard Pates of Des Moines, Iowa, urged Secretary of State Hillary Clinton to work to reduce nuclear arms and maintain security in the Middle East. Bishop Pates, who chairs the U.S. Bishops' Committee on International Justice and Peace, acknowledged the possibility that Iran is developing its nuclear capabilities. The bishops say before the U.S. takes military action, all other options need to be exhausted. And the House has unanimously passed a resolution condemning the Iranian government's harsh treatment of a Protestant pastor. Youssef Nardakhani was sentenced to die after refusing to renounce his faith. He had been arrested back in 2009 after complaining that his son was forced to read the Quran in school. An advocacy group says that has been following the situation closely says an execution order for the pastor was issued last week. Well, have you ever been told to have a heart? A thief or group of thieves in Ireland may have taken that expression literally. A 900-year-old heart of St. Lawrence O'Toole was stolen from the cage where it was kept in Christ Church Cathedral in Dublin. Now, according to a report, there were no signs of a break-in, and the heart was the only item stolen. St. Lawrence O'Toole was an Archbishop of Dublin in the 12th century. Well, the head of a breakaway Anglican church has been removed from his post. Archbishop John Hepworth was ousted as head of the traditional Anglican Communion. The church's College of Bishops voted to remove Hepworth rather than wait until after Easter, which is when the Archbishop had announced he would step down. Hepworth had been working to reconcile the traditional Anglican Communion with the Catholic Church. Well, the traditional Anglican Communion now says it will remain Anglican. Last year, Hepworth, who was formerly a Catholic priest, also claimed that he was raped by 3 priests while studying in the seminary in 1960s and the 70s. Turning now to Cuba, where that country's bishops have issued a declaration welcoming Pope Benedict. The Pope will be making a 3-day visit to Cuba at the end of the month. It's the first time a Pope has visited the country since John Paul did so in 1998. Cuba's bishops say the visit will fulfill a desire of the country's Catholics and those who feel connected to the church in some way. Now, the Pope will arrive in Cuba on March 26th, following a 3-day trip to Mexico. NET will have extensive coverage of the Pope's travels. And while he is in Cuba, Benedict is expected to speak about a native son who may be on the path to sainthood. Rome Reports has more.
Benedict XVI will visit Cuba from March 26th to the 28th. During his visit, he's expected to speak about one of their national heroes, the Catholic priest Felix Varela. Born in Havana in 1788, he was ordained as a priest at the age of 23. He's remembered as one of the nation's greatest teachers and was a political activist, calling for the abolition of slavery. He also made calls for democracy and independence from Spain. At 34, he represented Cuba and other provinces in the Spanish Parliament. However, after Napoleon invaded Spain, he fled to the United States. There, he founded the first Spanish newspaper in the U.S. He also continued to work with the youth and in education. After spending 30 years in exile, he died in Florida without ever seeing his country again. He was remembered by John Paul II during his trip to Cuba in 1998. He emphasized Varela's deep spirituality that fueled his work and love for his home country.
Meanwhile, a group of Cubans has signed a letter asking Pope Benedict to reconsider his trip to their homeland. The Miami Herald reports that the letter, signed by close to 750 Cuban dissidents, expressed concern that the trip could suggest the Cuban government can continue to oppress those that disagree with it. Now, the letter did not explicitly call for the Pope to cancel his trip. And the Bishops' Conference of Mexico is warning about fake tickets to the Pope's Mass in León. According to Catholic news agency, the bishops issued the warning in conjunction with Mexico's Consumer Protection Agency. Tickets will be free and will first be made available in the Diocese of León before being offered to other Mexican dioceses. The bishops of California are congratulating advocates who were successful in getting a measure to repeal the death penalty on the November ballot. The Save California campaign collected the necessary 800,000 signatures to get a measure on the ballot that would replace the death penalty with a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. The bishops say they were pleased to have taken part in the effort and personally thanked the Catholic volunteers who participated. And a New York congressman is trying to give a break to parents who pay for their children to go to school. We were at St. Margaret's School in Middle Village for the announcement on Friday.
Every parent knows that one of the most important and most expensive responsibilities of parenthood is educating their children. This is why I'm here today to introduce H.R. 4075, the Tax and Education Assistance for Children, the TEACH Act. The TEACH Act will provide parents who send their children to non-public elementary and secondary schools a tax credit of up to $5,000.
Many parents want to send their children to faith-based schools, whether it's Catholic, Jewish, Protestant, whatever, and sometimes they just simply can't afford to do that even though they want to. So this bill would make it possible.
It would really benefit the parents of our Catholic school children and parents of children in other religious schools, giving them a break on their taxes.
There are currently more than 4 million students served by approximately 33,000 non-public schools throughout the United States. Even though they no longer use the resources of the public school system, they are still responsible for paying taxes that go toward the public schools. And on top of that, they have to pay for the tuition of the non-public school. In essence, a double taxation.
Many of us make many sacrifices, and for the most part, we're running out of sacrifices. I mean, there's nothing else to take away. And with this, it would afford us to be able to follow our belief system and get a little bit of help on top of it.
It also helps the public schools because they're already, as we hear so often, at least in New York City, they're so overburdened.
Thank you.
The best possible outcome is that this bill would be passed.
I really think now is the time for this proposal to go through. We really could use it.
First step's been done. The problems will be, I think, political.
I'm sure, as usual, I mean, there'll be people on both sides of the aisle who would both support and oppose. But I think if you really try and put the politics aside and you look at it through the lens of common sense, I think it's helpful really to everyone.
Stay tuned, there's more currents ahead. Coming up, it's a fresh push to loosen abortion restrictions in New York State, with pro-life advocates speaking out against it.
We have the highest abortion rate in the country, no restrictions on the procedure here in New York State. And yet we have this dangerous legislative proposal that hopes to expand access to abortion. It's unnecessary.
Welcome back. Well, as part of his State of the State address, New York Governor Andrew Cuomo vowed to fight for passage of the Reproductive Health Act. Critics of the measure say it would do a lot to ease abortion restrictions in the state. That includes making abortion legal throughout the 9 months of pregnancy and allowing non-doctors to perform abortions. Now, many on the pro-life side are working to get the word out in order to stop the measure from passing. The Brooklyn Diocese Office of Faith Formation and the Joint Parish Respect Life Committee brought some of these voices together at St. John's University yesterday.
Over 1 million abortions every year, and yet they fight every small change in the laws that might offer some protection for mothers and babies. And now they want to expand the so-called right to abortion here in New York by passing the Reproductive Health Act.
Abortion law in New York State is anything goes, basically. We have the highest abortion rate in the country, no restrictions on the procedure here in New York State. And yet we have this dangerous legislative proposal that hopes to expand access to abortion. It's unnecessary.
Yeah, I think that it'd be important for people to know what this really means, what its implications are, and why they must do everything they can to influence their legislators in both houses to see that it does not come to pass.
Do we really need to ensure an affirmative right to abortion under New York law? Is any woman having difficulty finding an abortion in New York State? I think that is our #1 argument against this bill. Show us where it's necessary. Show us where anybody's having a hard time finding abortion in New York State. Governor Cuomo has indicated that he supports this dangerous bill. We are trying very hard to stop him and to stop that agenda from going through. The New York State Board of Bishops, including Bishop DiMarzio and Cardinal Dolan, are meeting with the governor in just a week and a half. We're very hopeful that we're going to convince him it is not in his best interest or in the best interests of women and children to move this bill forward.
If we don't get involved in politics and take a serious interest in this, then the people on the other side will win, and we can't afford to let that happen.
There's been an erosion across the board of moral values that needs to be addressed, and unfortunately, up until now, we haven't seen a lot of motivation on the Catholic side to come out and start talking about the issues. So we're making the rounds to these groups and trying to get them more involved.
You've got to make it mean something. You have to go back to your original parishes and do the things that are necessary to make everyone aware of the battles that are being fought and whom they're being fought against. There's been a certain lack of initiative on the part of the church, hewing to this separation of church and state, but to a point where it has been counterproductive.
We need to be politically active. We need to be more politically active, and hopefully this will be an issue. If we lose our religious freedoms, that it's going to band Catholics together.
We need prayer and action. We need to speak out against the evil, otherwise evil takes over a country, and we can't let that happen.
I hope that the audience here today is better informed, better educated, and motivated and mobilized enough to act, to call up their state senator, their state assembly person, and tell them why, as their voting constituent, they don't want this pushed forward.
Stay tuned, there's more currents ahead. When we return, the public gets its first look at the Vatican's secret archives. Finally tonight, the Vatican is giving the public access to some of its exclusive archives. A new exhibit is on display in Rome, and we get more on that from Rome Reports.
More than 100 original documents that have been closely guarded in the Vatican are being put on display to the public for the first time ever in Rome's exhibition Lux and Arcana, the Vatican's Secret Archives Revealed.
The goal has been to make these documents available since they're often difficult to understand because they're in other languages or in Latin and they have complex drawings.
There are many documents that will attract visitors, such as the letter written by the Lords of the English Parliament to Clement VII, asking for the marriage annulment of Henry VIII. It's a scroll that is 3 feet long with 83 seals attached to it. The project took 1 year to prepare, with some 150 people working to present these 100 documents to the public. Their importance is not only limited to the Church, but the entire history for much of Western society. On display, for example, are the records of the abdication of Queen Christina from Sweden, which shows the seals and signatures of nearly 300 members of Parliament. Among the documents is a letter from St. Teresa of Avila on the reform of the Order of Mount Carmel. There is also the letter by the cardinals who set the rules of the conclave, and a copy of the Lunario Novo, which officially abolished 10 calendar days to adapt the public calendar to the lunar cycle. Many of these historical documents can almost be passed without recognizing them, such as the bull Ineffabilis Deus, which decreed the dogma of the Immaculate Conception. There is also this impressive scroll, nearly 200 feet long, which tells a very particular story. It contains the testimony of 231 Knights of Templar, who were interrogated by the Pope's apostolic commissioners. 2 years earlier, they had been arrested by order of the French king, Philip IV. He wanted to spread out the wealth of the order. To clarify the matter, the Pope appointed a commission to investigate the Templars. The exhibition ends with a visit to the so-called hidden period, with documents from the papacy of Pius XII, written during World War II. It's called hidden because the reports from this time period have yet to be opened to the public. A version of Chetzekoa is on display that was given to the Pope by a group of women that were prisoners of a concentration camp. It was made with thin sheets of brass and was given to the Pope wrapped in white and red sheets, the colors of Poland. Next to it is a letter from the nuncio in Holland to the Vatican's Secretariat of State, announcing the death of Edith Stein and her sister, Rosa. You can also see the bull of the canonization of St. Francis Xavier and the records from the trial of Galileo. The items make up 12 centuries of documents that behind them reveal their stories for the first time. For right now, they will only be open to those who travel to see the exhibition Lux in Arcana, the Vatican's secret archives revealed.
And the exhibit also includes documents that reveal Pope Pius XII's work in aiding Jews during World War II. Among the items, a letter from a rabbi who had been interred thanking Pius for sending aid to a concentration camp. Also included in the exhibit is a report from a papal envoy on the conditions at 7 internment camps in southern Italy. Pius has, over the years, been the target of critics who say he did not do enough to help Jews. Well, that is all for this edition of Currents. Coming up tomorrow, is the church obsessed with issues related to sex? A local priest provides some insight on that. Until then, be sure to visit us online at currentsny.net. You can also connect with us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter. For all of us here at Currents, I'm Liz Faublis. Thank you for watching and have a good night.